Story 1. The date went well. At the end, the lady told me I would have to put my kids in the back of my mind and, if we were to have any, to make sure new ones were a priority. Before the date, she had complimented me on being a father. This is the first time I have ever blocked someone. Story 2. I went on a date with a girl who kept asking me about yoga and spirituality. I am not well versed in either topic. I am just Indian. Story 3. I went on a date with a man who believed women were trying to take over the world. How did he find out? Who leaked it to him? Story 4. I asked a girl out when I was embarrassingly drunk one night. I woke up to a text asking if I was still up for our date later. I had no memory of asking her out or who she was. I only had her name on my phone. Of course, I said yes, and we went for drinks at a bar later. The only problem was that I couldn't remember what she looked like. When I arrived, I walked straight past her and sat down at the adjacent table where another girl was sitting, waiting for her boyfriend to come back. I had already said, "Hey, it's so nice to see you again," before the realization set in. It was icy when I changed tables, to say the least. There was no second date. Story 5. I went to a movie with a guy who chewed tobacco and he spat on the floor the entire time. This was the 1990s when I was a teenager. There was no second date. Not only is it gross, but he also made someone else's job infinitely more unpleasant than it ever needed to be. A stranger. No one deserves that. Story 6. I went on a first date with a guy from an online app. He kept asking why I was on the fence about having kids. He also emphasized that I am almost 35 and my biological clock is ticking. This was despite my telling him that having a child is not a priority for me, as I am more focused on my life and career. I ended up crying on the way home after that date. Story 7. I went on a lunch date with a girl in the college food court. The date was going well. She asked me for some fries. In my attempt to appear confident, I picked up the box of fries, poured them onto the table and said, "Here you go. You can have the leftovers." She gave me a surprised look, got up, and left. My embarrassment still haunts me 20 years later. Story 8. I went on a date with a guy who was convinced that he could manipulate people. He kept telling me that I was going to sleep with him. After about an hour at the bar, I paid my half of the bill and told him I was going to head home without him. He decided to stay at the bar to flirt with a waitress. Story 9. I went on a date with a woman who showed up 3 hours late and brought her assistant from work with her. I was in another town for the weekend, and she messaged me wanting to meet up but then did that. It was very strange. Story 10. 15 years ago, I finally went on a date with my high school crush. It was a simple dinner at Boston Pizza. A group of her friends walked in, and she said she just wanted to go say hi. She ended up staying with that group and talking for 20 minutes while I sat alone in a booth on the other side of the restaurant. I regret not getting up and leaving, but then again, experiences like that are necessary for learning to respect oneself. Story 11. It isn't a real tragedy in the grand scheme of things. I had a woman bring her 2-year-old son along on a date. I knew she had a son, but I had no idea she was going to bring him on our first date. Had she told me beforehand, I would probably have been okay with it, even if it was a last-minute decision and she texted me the day of the date. However, the fact that she showed up with him without prior notice or explanation did not sit well with me. It wasn't the presence of her son. It was the lack of courtesy in informing me. Story 12. He spent the entire date talking about his ex and then accidentally called me her name. Check, please. Excuse me? Story 13. This is recent and ongoing. I dated a guy and it went amazingly well. He asked to get off the dating apps and I agreed. However, he started ghosting me when I was away for work for a few days. Now he texts me sporadically, apologizing and saying he misses me and wants to make plans, but nothing is changing. I haven't seen or heard his voice in weeks. I'd like to leave him in the past, but I feel sad because I really liked him. I feel disrespected and more confused than almost any other time in my life. Story 14. I was 21 when a girl insisted on doing a palm reading for me at a restaurant. She then told me that I would die very young. I didn't ask for another date. Story 15. My sister has a child. I remember her telling me that her friend insisted she hide the fact that she has a child until a man falls in love with her. I told her directly that it is the worst dating advice I have ever heard, and I still believe that today. Story 16. X wrote me a letter in her own blood after we broke up, as if she dipped a quill in it and wrote 2 pages of lined paper filled with unhinged rage. She was not well. Story 17. I met a man in the early days of internet dating around 2004. Despite stating on the website that I was straight and him knowing what I looked like, he decided I was a lesbian because of my short hair. The entire date consisted of him asking if I was gay, me denying it, and him talking about something else for 5 minutes before asking again. A highlight was him miming a sexual act. I would have left when he went to the restroom, but I had a broken leg and was on crutches, so I was very slow. Story 18. I went on a first date in my late teens with a girl of Indian ancestry. I ordered fancy food at an Indian restaurant to impress her, but it was so spicy that I couldn't speak after about 10 minutes. There was no second date. I never tried to use food ordering to impress a woman again. We were on opposite sides of the same social group, and I heard her perspective secondhand, which revealed that it went even worse for me than I initially thought. I knew it was bad. Story 19. One time, I went on a date with a cute girl. We visited a local coffee shop, and I ordered a big black coffee with 3 shots of espresso. I don't think I've ever really talked as fast or as much as I did on that date. It's a funny memory. Story 20. I went to a New Year's house party with a guy. I caught him doing drugs with a girl in the bedroom, and we had a disagreement. I drove home and then he broke up with me. Story 21. The man spent the whole time diagnosing me with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which he was correct about, but I did not find out until later. He then spent half an hour talking to a homeless man at the bar instead of me. I took the opportunity to leave and join my friend, who happened to be walking down the street when I looked out the window. Story 22. I met a guy at an event I was working and we hit it off. We exchanged numbers and planned a date. He sent me the wrong address, so I drove into a very unsafe part of Philadelphia and walked around looking for the bar for 15 minutes before he called me upset, asking if I had stood him up. I finally got to the right bar, and he immediately started criticizing me for thinking he invited me to a shady neighborhood, refusing to acknowledge that he had sent me the wrong address. Then he fell completely silent for the rest of the date while I tried to make conversation. I never spoke to him again. Story 23. I went on a date with a man 10 years older than me who had no manners, talked very loudly, and shared our entire date on his Instagram stories. When the waiter complimented me by saying, "You are so pretty," he immediately got upset and told the waiter, "No, you are the pretty one. Look at you." On top of this, he frequently used offensive language in our conversation. After the date, I politely told him that I wished him the best and that I was moving on. He became very angry and bombarded my phone with long voicemails, calling me a loser and saying no one loves me. He then blocked me on Instagram and began posting sad quotes on his page. He is 38 years old. Story 24. I dated a guy for 3 months. He was a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs, and they won their first Super Bowl in years in 2020. He talked about how he wished the crowd would have groped Shakira when she jumped off stage, mentioned how attractive Jennifer Lopez was, and claimed he saw a video of Erin Andrews, a sports reporter, being secretly filmed in her hotel room on the dark web. He was drunk and very proud of himself. I broke up with him immediately. He cried, sent me Valentine's Day flowers, and his mother called to apologize, saying she didn't raise him that way and that he's a good boy. I still left him, and he continues to stalk my Instagram stories. He now sees me happy with a man who respects me, and I'm okay with him checking in to see what he lost. He also thought I should quit my good career with a master's degree to become a homemaker. Story 25. When pandemic restrictions were loosening, I had been seeing a guy who stayed with me for a while. He said he had been vaccinated but showed signs of being actively sick with COVID-19, forcing us both to quarantine in my apartment. He also decided that he would rather be with his ex. So, he came to me sick and ready to break up. But he wanted to have sex and only told me this afterward, without mentioning the COVID-19. It was the worst experience of my entire life. Then he literally just disappeared while we were supposed to be quarantining, and I never saw or spoke to him again. I recently found out through some mutual acquaintances that they were back together. Story 26. If you mean a romantic acquaintance, he was married and had a child, and he did not mention it. Story 27. I went on a date in college with a guy back before 2004, which was over 20 years ago. It was going well until he asked me what I wanted to eat. I asked for some fries. He picked up the box of fries, poured it all out onto the table, and said, "Here you go. You can have the leftovers." I was so surprised that I got up and left. Story 28. Apart from the occasions when the other person didn't show up or canceled an hour before, there was one date in particular. At that time, I didn't have a car, so I rented one to go on a coffee date about 50 kilometers away. In her pictures, she looked absolutely gorgeous. However, once I arrived, I almost didn't recognize her because she looked completely different. During the date, she talked about how her dad is an alcoholic and she suffers from serious depression. The coffee place she suggested had the worst coffee I have ever tasted. So yes, there wasn't another date. Story 29. I drove 3 hours to meet a girl, only to find that her parents had grounded her, so she couldn't come out. They had grounded her because she had attempted suicide the night before. I was unaware of this before I arrived. Story 30. I feel fortunate that this was my worst date. The guy described himself as an amateur comedian on his profile. When he arrived, I noticed he had a slight body odor. We got on to the subject of humor, and I mentioned that the kinds of things that make me laugh are slightly unsettling, like some memes. He then proceeded to share a series of dead baby jokes, which, needless to say, did not land. I somewhat feel bad for him. Story 31. I have shared this story a few times, so I will try to shorten it. I was a few years out of an abusive relationship and still had the uncontrollable urge to reach out if I thought I had upset a woman. We had been chatting online, and the day before our date, she sent me a message that didn't end with an affectionate sign-off. I thought she was upset, so I immediately jumped into damage control. She noticed this and commented that my ex really did a number on me. The date went fine, but she spent most of it talking about my mental health issues. I had enough and said I needed to go home as I was mentally exhausted. She asked for a second chance to turn things around, so I stayed. She was charming and funny, but I really had to leave to catch the last bus home. She invited me to a club with her, so I went. I met some of her friends, danced, and had a good time. We were at the bar when I tried to kiss her. She placed her hand on my chest, gently pushed me away, and said, "Oh, you think so, do you?" I said it was fine if she didn't want to, that it was her choice, and went back to dancing. She followed and kissed me. A short while later, I started feeling unwell. I'm not saying my drink was spiked, but I went from being tipsy to feeling nauseous. Since I was far from home, I asked if I could stay at her place. No expectations, just food, water, and somewhere to sleep. She agreed. Back at her place, she prepared a snack for herself but didn't offer me anything. I was too polite to ask except for a glass of water. We were in the kitchen chatting, and somehow the conversation turned to when she had been a swinger and a professional dominatrix. We went up to bed, cuddled, and I was the big spoon. She started grinding against me. I thought, why not? So we started fooling around, but I struggled to perform. She got upset and snapped at me to go to sleep. I woke up hours later with a pounding headache and a dry mouth, unable to find my water. I stumbled through the dark to the bathroom, drank some water, and returned to bed. She got up, went to the toilet, returned, turned on the light, and began getting dressed. From this point on, she snapped at me every time she spoke. She asked if I wanted coffee. I thought it was strange since it was early morning, but I agreed when she said it was already 7:30 a.m. and she was late to start her day. I got dressed and went downstairs, where she was preparing food but didn't offer me any. Again, I was too polite to ask. She asked how I was getting home. I said I would walk to the next village a mile away, find a cafe, and wait for the buses to start running. She offered me a ride, which I accepted. When we reached the village, she pulled up by a bus stop and wanted to know when my bus was due. I told her I didn't know, but it wasn't an issue since I could just hang around, get some food, and wait. If not, I could walk to the next village half a mile away, where there were more buses and cafes. Before I could get out, she decided to drive me further. Once we reached the next village, I told her to drop me off wherever it was safe to pull over. She ignored me and kept driving through the village and out the other side. I asked her to stop, and when she ignored me again, I more firmly told her to let me out. She shouted that she was taking me all the way home. I protested because I was hungry and needed to eat before feeling sick, and I didn't want to be around her anymore. But I figured if it got me home faster, even if I felt sick, it was her fault since I did warn her. She shouted at me for singing along to the radio, leading to an uncomfortable silence for the rest of the drive. When we neared my house, she asked which street was mine, and I told her to pull into the car park of the nearby shops. She stopped, and I thanked her for the ride and got out quickly. I went to the shop for snacks, went home, and promptly fell asleep, waking up in the afternoon. Later, I found a few missed calls, a voicemail, and several angry texts from her. She stated that she never wanted to see me again, that she needed a man, not a boy who needed to be coddled. She didn't sleep with me in the morning because my breath smelled bad. She also accused me of hiding something by not having her drop me off on my street. I replied, explaining that it's rude not to offer a guest something to eat, especially when they're not feeling well. It's even ruder not to offer breakfast to an overnight guest. None of us tried to instigate anything in the morning. If my breath was an issue, she could have suggested mouthwash, a mint, chewing gum, or even offered a spare toothbrush. It was concerning that she didn't pull over when I asked because if roles were reversed, it would have been more problematic. I didn't have her drop me off on my street because I wanted food, and my street is often blocked by other cars on weekends. She responded with insulting comments, and we never spoke again. And that is why I will never date a teacher again. Story 32. A man tried to get me drunk so I wouldn't notice his shortcomings. I realized after a few days that his personality was lacking, but I was young and decided to give him a chance. Story 33. I invited a guy out to dinner after he was persistent, so I gave him a chance. Neither of us had a car, so we decided to meet at the restaurant. The plaza was right next to a bus stop and not far away, but he didn't tell me he didn't know how to get there until the day of. I had to give him directions and the location. After waiting for an hour or two, he informed me he got off about 10 blocks away from where I directed him and got lost, so I had to arrange an Uber for him. When he arrived, he looked completely different. He had an unpleasant smell, greasy hair, was covered in dandruff, and his nails were dirty. He was also not very good at conversation. I have never ghosted anyone before or after that encounter. Story 34. A girl I was speaking to said she wanted to go for a drive and asked where I lived. We hadn't met before this. She arrived sometime later, and immediately I could tell she was not a safe driver. We were going too fast for the suburban streets we were in, especially in the dark. At one point, we ended up at a dead end, and if I hadn't told her to slow down, eventually we moved out of suburbia and into the city outskirts, driving down the larger road that runs along the river. We were still speeding. Then her ex called, and she picked up, thankfully using Bluetooth. Apparently, she still lives with him. She continued speeding while chatting, and I just sat there. Fortunately, we didn't crash, and she dropped me back at home not long after. A couple of days later, we met up again, and she revealed that she had a sprained ankle for some time. Definitely not ideal when you're driving dangerously. These are the kinds of women I seem to entertain when I can't make new friends. Story 35. When I was a freshman in high school, I had my first boyfriend. I broke it off after 2 dates because he started to creep me out a bit. After that, I heard through the grapevine about how he was sad because he only got 2 steps into his plan. He made a detailed plan of how he was going to get me to do more with him until the 10th date, where I would sleep with him. Not only that, but he told many people, and I was one of the last to know. Story 36. I matched up with a girl online. She didn't look happy to be taken to a pub restaurant. It wasn't really fancy, but they had a good rating for food. She poked fun at my job, which involved working with the elderly, supporting them and making sure they're okay. She seemed to think I was lucky that a woman like her would even give me a chance, as she had height requirements and I am a 5 feet 3 inches short guy. The date was just awkward. I went home, and she apparently had another better date lined up, so we went our separate ways. My roommate's friend had a story about a guy who was so entitled that he thought paying for a film and dinner was a green light to getting intimate. He also made some inappropriate proposals to her. I'm sure you can imagine what he was asking for. Story 37. I'm an awkward combination of decent looking and asexual. I went on a date with a guy who lied, claiming he was asexual as well. In reality, he had overheard me mention my orientation and became obsessed, wanting to cure me because, as he put it, my body was a waste otherwise. He followed me into a bathroom, and I was really lucky to escape. Story 38. I'm going to share the best date of my life. I was in college, just one day minding my own business and eating a burger and fries in the cafeteria. Several tables away, I heard someone spill something. It looked like a guy spilled his fries all over his table, but then I heard him offer them to the girl sitting across from him, which seemed rude. She got up and started walking my way toward the exit. I was a bit cocky back then and offered her some of my fries, saying that the guy was inconsiderate. She laughed and sat down with me for lunch. Turns out she is a billionaire heiress, and we have been married for 6 years now. Story 39. I went on a date with a beautiful lady and thought I was very lucky. We went to a hotel, where she kneeled down and engaged in intimacy with me until I reached climax. Afterward, we relaxed, chatted, and prepared to continue. However, I discovered she had male anatomy and I left. Story 40. Once I was dressed nicely and ready to meet her. I wanted to change our plans. The cinema seemed risky because we couldn't talk, but dinner was fine, and it was just up the road from each other. I thought it wouldn't be a big deal. So, I texted her, but she didn't like the change and jumped out the window. I didn't get to go. Story 41. They haven't been that bad. I've mostly dated friends. This is why I don't use dating apps specifically for dating. Story 42. My first date at 17 was with a girl who saw me at a wedding but had never talked to me. She obtained my number, and I genuinely enjoyed texting her. However, when we met up, she was nowhere near as enthusiastic as she had been in our texts and seemed quite miserable the entire time. She shared that she had struggled with depression and had once attempted to take her own life. She felt her family hated her, had no friends, and was extremely passionate about politics and debating it. I found it challenging to connect with her after that, and I decided not to go back for a second date. Story 43. My date encountered his ex in a restaurant. He began belittling her and using inappropriate names. He also ridiculed her date and made fun of him with derogatory remarks. Story 44. The worst date is when someone keeps pushing you to do things you don't want to do. However, if you're brave enough to say no, and then they give you the cold shoulder because they can't get what they want, that is incredibly frustrating. I never want to be in a relationship like that. Story 45. Not quite a date, but this guy was strange. He was into some unusual things, and I really wanted to end things with him. When he met my family for the first time, he was very awkward. 2 days later, he broke up with me. The bonus was when he loudly exclaimed during our date in public, "What color is your son's poop?" Try to guess what unusual stuff he was into. Story 46. Once I had serious mental health issues because my life was falling apart, and I didn't know what to do. I met a guy who was totally not my type, but he fell in love with me. I said no, but he kept nagging, so I thought I'd give him a chance, hoping he might help me forget what I was going through. To be honest, it was disgusting. I didn't like anything about him, neither his personality nor his life. I was just feeling lonely. The worst part was when he realized I was not into him at all. He tried to make me jealous in cheap ways, like complimenting other women or making jokes with them, which only made me more disgusted. He lived his entire life with women literally fighting over him, so I was kind of shocked that he couldn't accept my disinterest. In the end, I told him I would never be with someone like him. Someone with much less money, a smoker, uneducated, spending his time on childish activities, and enjoying making fun of others. He didn't even like his life but was doing nothing to fix it, expecting me to live it for him. No, Even though he knew he would never have me, he kept texting and calling. Eventually, I ended it. Story 47. A fun story about her sleeping with her ex after they broke up. Even though he was in a relationship with another girl. This happened because she had suspicions about him cheating while they were together. Story 48. I spent 3 months in a committed relationship, opening up and truly being vulnerable, getting to know each other and developing love. Everything was going great until she suddenly said, "I don't know if I can develop a connection with you. I haven't felt it yet." She ended the relationship, stating she never felt the emotional connection she needed. This was completely the opposite of what she had said the week before. After months of putting in effort to connect, as she had encouraged me to do, I feel like I am not enough and that the deepest part of me has been rejected. Story 49. In 2009, I went on a date with a guy I met on a dating app. He arrived at the restaurant wearing a dirty t-shirt and his hair was greasy. I tried to be more open-minded, thinking there might be a good reason for his appearance. However, he turned out to be disrespectful and shared his disdain for older people. He actually said that all older individuals should be harmed and mentioned he had a shotgun for that purpose if it ever became legal. He said other unsettling things, but that comment stuck with me. I ended the date early and never looked back. Story 50. I was paired with a girl from a crosstown high school for a road rally, and we had a great time and sort of hit it off. I got her home phone number, as there were no cell phones in 1970, and we set up a date. The following weekend, I showed up and picked her up. The date started off fine, but the conversation was awkward. After the date, I told her I would call her about going to a movie. When I called a few days later, she confessed that I had actually gone out with her identical twin sister because she was sick on date night. I tried to laugh it off but decided to decline another date. Thanks a lot, Natalie or Nancy. Story 51. I went to hang out with a friend. When I arrived, she had her friend with her. It wasn't mentioned that it was a date, so we might have just been hanging out. Neither of them acknowledged me, except to occasionally ask a question without listening to my answers. Her friend even asked me how much I made and if I had a large enough anatomy. I was riding in the back seat. We met up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and ended up in Chicago. Her friend said, "Hey, buy us dinner." And I told her to pull over so I could get out. They both started talking negatively and asked if I was just going to leave. I told them yes, and then spent too much money on a ride back to Kenosha. Story 52. I met someone through Tinder and made out with a woman old enough to be my mother on our date. Then, I was made to feel like a jerk for getting upset and wanting to go home. It was the first time I ended a relationship and didn't cry afterward. I only put up with his nonsense for so long because he was good at Sonic Adventure Battle 2. Story 53. He showed me a rotting seal skull in his backyard and mentioned that while surfing, he saw a dead seal pup on the beach, hoping it was actually dead when he found it. He then went back to his house to get his machete and returned to cut off its head to save the skull. That experience, along with some other encounters with rude or strange individuals, certainly stood out. Story 54. A friend of mine urged me to go out with her sister. She also encouraged her sister to go out with me. I have no idea why she wanted us to date, but during our one outing, neither of us wanted to be there, and it was quite awkward. There was nothing wrong with her. She was just as hesitant about the situation as I was. It was an unusual experience. Story 55. My best friend was brutally abused and left in her room, stolen from by her boyfriend of a year. We all knew him, and no one could have seen this happen. Please be careful, girls, and help us share her story. I have never needed your help more. I have few friends and few people to share this with, so please help me. Story 56. One time on a first date, a guy asked me if I was looking for something monogamous or non-monogamous. I said I had done both, but I was looking for something monogamous. He responded that he had dabbled in non-ethical non-monogamy. I was taken aback and said, "Oh, so you're just a dog?" He then lectured me about the double standard, claiming that when women do it, it's acceptable. At least he admitted to being a cheater early on. Story 57. Paris, winter, rooftop bar. She seemed like a question I wanted to answer. She spoke 5 languages, but none conveyed the truth. By the second drink, I realized that everything was a performance. Smiles were rehearsed, stories curated, and charm was devoid of soul. I excused myself mid-sentence, left cash on the table, and walked into the night without a coat. The cold was honest. Worst dates aren't loud. They are hollow. You don't miss the person. You miss the potential. Story 58. On a first date, everything was going fairly well. She made a comment about how all cultures that eat animals like dogs and cats should be eliminated. China, Asia, and the Middle East should just be gone. Thinking she was joking, I laughed and said, "Just go full Hiroshima, huh? What's that?" Was not the response I expected. She was serious about advocating for genocide against a quarter of the world and didn't understand what I found wrong with that. Story 59. I have been on 2 first dates and both were awful. The first one occurred while I was working in a kiosk. I was very friendly to everyone, and a cute Irish man invited me for coffee. I accepted, but he had no money because he only had cash, and they accepted card payments only, so I paid. He talked about his ethnic background and then asked about mine. He claimed there was no way I could just be my race without being mixed with white because I was so beautiful. I asked him directly if I had to be mixed to be considered beautiful and why people of my ethnicity could not be beautiful without being mixed. I don't think his intention was malicious, and he realized he had messed up. The second date was set up by a mutual friend. We spoke on Instagram for a bit and then arranged to meet for coffee. He changed the time to later and ended up being late. I called him out on his tardiness, and he then asked what my name was, despite the fact that my username is my name. I was confused by his lack of awareness, but I feel like he only asked because I pointed out his lateness. Story 60. I went to the cinema, and he bought a large popcorn, large crisps, and a drink. I presumed we would share, but he didn't ask if I wanted anything. He proceeded to eat, chewing loudly, and didn't offer me anything. He was so loud, and it was uncomfortable to be around him. The last straw was when he tried to kiss me. I was so embarrassed that I asked him to drop me in town, and I was happy when he said he was going home because he was tired. I went to the nightclub where I knew my ex would be and had a fabulous time. He was so happy to see me. I ignored his texts for weeks and realized what a creep he was compared to my true love, who turned out to be a gentleman. We went on to get married. Story 61. The one and only date I had 20 years ago canceled on me to spend time with some friends. I've been alone since. Story 62. I had a relationship with a Spanish girl. I ended up being unfaithful because I was more focused on casual encounters than on being in a committed relationship. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.